He sat on the edge of the bathtub with his shoes still on. The water in the tub was cold, not running. Just sitting there, like it had been waiting longer than he had. His phone was face down on the sink, buzzing every few minutes. Debt collectors didn't leave voicemails anymore. They didn't need to. The silence after the call was enough. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear. From exhaustion. The kind that lives in the bones. He kept staring at the little plastic stool in the corner, the one his daughter used to reach the sink. A pink one, covered in stickers she'd peeled off other things and pressed there like it mattered. His throat tightened. He didn't cry. He just breathed like something was sitting on his chest. And then he heard her footsteps in the hallway. Small, bare, unhurried. And he froze. Her footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. He could see the shadow under the frame. Small. Still. He wiped his face with both hands, hard, like he could erase whatever was there. The mirror showed a man who hadn't slept. Eyes swollen. Jaw tight. He looked older than 32. He felt older than that. Daddy? Her voice wasn't scared, just curious. He stood too fast. The room tilted. He grabbed the sink and waited for the floor to settle. The cold water in the tub stared back at him. He pulled the drain without looking at it. The sound of it swirling away felt louder than it should have. "Yeah, baby," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. He cleared it. "Yeah, I'm here." He unlocked the door. She was in her pajamas. Purple ones with faded stars, hair messy on one side, like she'd been turning in her sleep. She held her stuffed rabbit by one ear. "You're up early," she said. He nodded. Couldn't sleep. She studied him the way kids do. Too direct. Too honest. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist. He hesitated a second. Then he held her, her cheek pressed against his shirt. Warm, solid, real. He closed his eyes. "Your heart's fast," she said into his chest. "Just had bad coffee." She pulled back and squinted at him. "You didn't make coffee yet." He almost smiled. "Then I guess I'm just excited for today." "What's today?" He paused. He had no idea. "Pancake day," he said finally. Her face changed. Lit up. Immediate. Complete. "Chocolate chips? We'll see what the budget says," he muttered before he could stop himself. "What?" "Yeah, chocolate chips." She ran toward the kitchen like the world was steady and safe. He stood in the hallway alone for a moment. Then he walked to the kitchen and opened the cabinet. One box of pancake mix, almost empty. He poured it into a bowl and shook the box, trying to get the last of it. The sound was hollow. He added water. Stirred. The fridge light flicked on when he opened it. Too bright. Half a carton of eggs. No milk. Butter scraped thin. No chocolate chips. He leaned his head against the fridge door for a second. Then he closed it. She was at the table already, swinging her legs. "Can I crack the eggs?" "Just one." She cracked it too hard, shell and all. She froze. "I'm sorry." "It's fine." He picked the shell out slowly. Didn't rush. Didn't sigh. She watched his face carefully. "Daddy?" "Yeah. Are we still going to the big part today?" His hands slowed. The big part meant gas. Gas meant the last $20 in his wallet. That was supposed to stretch 3 days. He flipped the pancake. It tore. "Maybe later this week," he said. "You said today." "I know." She didn't pout. She didn't complain. She just nodded once and looked down at the table. That hurt more than if she'd cried. He slid the pancake onto her plate. It looked uneven. Thin. Not enough. She poured syrup carefully, like she didn't want to waste it. He sat across from her but didn't eat. "Aren't you having any?" "I'm not hungry." She looked at his plate, then at hers. She cut her pancake in half and pushed one piece toward him. He stared at it. "Eat," she said softly. Something in his throat tightened again. He shook his head. "You need it more." She frowned. "You're bigger." He let out a breath through his nose, almost a laugh. "Fine," he said, and took a bite. It tasted like water and flour. She watched him chew. Satisfied, she kept eating. After breakfast, she went to get dressed. He stayed at the table. The phone buzzed again. He flipped it over this time. 3 missed calls. Same number. A message from his landlord. "We need to talk today." He rubbed his face. He used to have a decent job. Not glamorous, but steady. Logistics supervisor. He was good at it. Showed up early. Stayed late. Fixed other people's mistakes without making noise about it. Then the company downsized. Temporary, they'd said. That was 8 months ago. Savings gone. Credit maxed. He'd sold his watch, his tools, the old TV. He hadn't told her why the couch disappeared. She came back dressed in jeans and a bright yellow shirt with a sun on it. "Do I look fast?" she asked, spinning once. "You look unstoppable." She grinned. He walked her to school. They didn't drive anymore unless they had to. The morning air was cool. She held his hand and swung it between them. He felt every step. Halfway there, she started talking about a drawing contest at school. First prize was $10,000. He almost didn't react. "10,000?" he asked. She nodded. "You just have to draw your biggest dream." "That's a lot of money." "It's for the whole school." "But one kid wins." He swallowed. "That's nice. I'm going to draw you." He looked down at her. "Why me?" "Because you're my biggest dream." He stopped walking. She tugged his hand. "Daddy?" He blinked. Cleared his throat. "That's not how dreams work." "It is for me." Kids say things like that without knowing what they're doing. They kept walking. At the school gate, she turned and hugged him again. "Don't be sad today," she whispered. He stiffened. "I'm not sad. You are a little." He forced a smile. "I'll work on it." She ran inside. He stood there longer than he meant to. Then his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Almost. Instead he answered. "Hello?" A woman's voice, calm, professional. "Is this Daniel Ruiz?" "Yes." "I'm calling regarding your recent application." He frowned. "Which one?" "The Regional Community Initiative Lottery." His mind went blank. "I didn't apply for." "Yes, you did. 3 months ago. For small business funding. You were placed on a waiting list." He remembered filling something out late at night, not expecting anything. "We've had a withdrawal," she continued. "You've been selected as a finalist. The prize pool is substantial." "How substantial?" $10 million. He didn't speak. Traffic passed behind him. A dog barked somewhere. "This isn't a scam," she added gently. "You can verify the number on our website, but we'll need your confirmation by tomorrow. There are conditions." His heart started racing again. 10 million. It didn't sound real. It sounded dangerous. "What conditions?" he asked. "There will be a public component, a series of evaluation challenges, community involvement, financial transparency. It's designed to ensure responsible allocation." He felt exposed just hearing that. "I don't do public." "I understand. But this opportunity won't wait." He looked at the school doors where his daughter had just disappeared. $10 million, or nothing. His chest felt tight again. "I'll think about it," he said. "You have 24 hours. The call ended. He stood there with the phone still pressed to his ear. The world hadn't changed. Cars still moved. Wind still touched his face. But something had shifted. Not hope. Pressure. And he didn't know yet if it was saving him or testing him. He walked home slower than usual. Not because he wanted to stretch the morning out, but because his legs felt uncertain, like they didn't trust the ground. The neighborhood looked the same. Cracked sidewalks, weeds pushing through concrete, a row of tired houses with faded paint and curtains that never moved. But now, every detail felt sharper, like the world was waiting for him to decide something. $10 million. He kept saying it in his head, trying to make it sound normal. It never did. At the corner store, he stopped without thinking. He went inside, the bell above the door ringing once. The smell of old fryer oil and cheap detergent hit him. He walked straight to the coffee machine, poured himself a cup, the cheapest size. When he got to the counter, he hesitated. His wallet felt light in his pocket. He could already picture what was inside. A $10 bill, a few ones, some coins. The cashier didn't look up at him much. Just scan the cup. That'll be $2.19. Daniel handed over $3. As the cashier gave him change, Daniel's eyes drifted to the lottery tickets behind the counter. Bright colors, fake gold lettering, pictures of smiling people holding oversized checks. He'd never bought one. Not once. He used to laugh at people who did. He used to think hope like that was childish, lazy. Now he stared at them like they were food. "You want one?" the cashier asked, noticing his gaze. Daniel blinked. "No." He took his coffee and walked out quickly, like he'd been caught doing something embarrassing. Back home, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. His daughter's cartoons weren't playing. No little shoes by the door. No humming from the bedroom, just silence and stale air. He set the coffee down and opened his laptop. It took a minute to boot up. The fan inside made a whining sound like it was struggling to breathe. He typed the name of the program the woman had mentioned. Regional Community Initiative Lottery. The site came up. It was real. Government logo, public records, pages of rules and terms, photos from past winners standing beside mayors and smiling council members. His throat went dry. He clicked through the eligibility list, reading like his life depended on it, because it did. Then he found his name. Not on a winner list. On a finalist list. Daniel Ruiz. His address was partially blurred, but it was there. He sat back slowly, the chair creaking beneath him. He didn't feel relief. He felt exposed. He kept reading. The program wasn't just a check, it was a process. Interviews, challenges, public loading elements, financial background review. They wanted people with community values, people who could be presented as examples. Daniel closed the laptop. He stared at the wall. The problem wasn't whether he wanted $10 million. The problem was what they would find if they looked too hard. Not crime, not anything like that, just failure. Eviction notices. Overdraft history. A stack of unpaid medical bills from the night his wife died. The hospital had said they were sorry. Then they sent invoices for months. He rubbed his hands over his face. A knock came at the door. He froze. Another knock. Harder. He stood up slowly and walked over. When he opened it, the landlord was already leaning forward like he owned the hallway. Mr. Grady. Mid-50s. Thick neck. Shirt always tucked in too tight. He didn't greet Daniel. He just slipped past him into the apartment. "You got my message?" Grady said. Daniel nodded. "Yeah." Grady stepped closer. His voice lowered like he was doing Daniel a favor. "You're 2 months behind." "I know." Grady's eyes flicked to the inside of the apartment again, like he was checking for furniture he could take. "I've been patient," Grady said, "but patience doesn't pay my mortgage." Daniel didn't answer. Grady sighed, shaking his head slowly, almost like he was disappointed. "You got a kid. I get it, but I can't let this drag." Daniel swallowed. "I'll have something soon." Grady laughed once, not amused, just sharp. "You said that last month." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm working," he said. "I'm applying everywhere." "Applications don't mean anything," Grady replied. "Money means something." Daniel felt heat rise in his face. He kept his hands at his sides, fists loosening and tightening without him noticing. Grady leaned in slightly. "I don't want to throw you out," he said, voice softer now. "But if you don't have at least half by Friday, I'm filing the eviction." Daniel stared at him. Half meant 800. He didn't have $8. Grady stepped back, like the conversation was over. "Friday," he repeated. Then he turned and walked away. Daniel closed the door slowly. He didn't move for a long time. The coffee had gone cold. He went to the kitchen counter and pulled open the drawer where he kept the bills. They weren't organized anymore. Just a pile of envelopes and late notices. He spread them out like cards. Electric, water, medical, credit, school lunch fees. The last one made his stomach turn. He hadn't even known there was a balance. He sat at the table. The chair felt too small for him, like the apartment had shrunk. He looked at the wall clock. Still hours before he had to pick her up. Too much time to think. He grabbed the phone and stared at the number the woman had called from. He hovered his thumb over it. Then he put the phone down again. He couldn't say yes yet, because saying yes meant stepping into something he didn't understand, but saying no. He didn't want to picture saying no. He got up and went to the bedroom closet. The closet door stuck a little. He yanked it open. A few shirts on hangers. A winter coat. A small shoebox on the top shelf. He pulled the box down carefully. Inside were things he didn't look at often. A folded hospital bracelet. A faded photo of his wife holding their daughter as a baby. A birthday card written in his wife's handwriting. Daniel's fingers hovered over the card. He didn't open it. He couldn't. Instead, his eyes landed on the small envelope tucked under the photo. He pulled it out. Inside was a crumpled piece of paper. A list. His wife's handwriting. Not neat. Rushed. Like she'd written it quickly, afraid she wouldn't have time. It was a list of promises, things Daniel had told her in the hospital when she was barely conscious. I'll keep her safe. I'll never let her feel alone. I'll make sure she grows up loved. I'll be enough. Daniel stared at the last line the longest. I'll be enough. His chest tightened. His vision blurred slightly. He didn't cry. He didn't even blink much. He just sat on the edge of the bed, holding the paper like it weighed more than it should. Then the phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He didn't answer this time. It buzzed again, then stopped. A few seconds later, a message came through. Finalist confirmation requiere. Failure to respond by tomorrow 9 a.m. will forfeit your position. Daniel stared at the screen. His hands were steady now. Not calm. Just empty. He put the paper back in the box and slid it onto the shelf again. Then he stood up and walked to the bathroom. He turned on the sink. Water rushed out. Loud. Constant. He stared at it. The thought came back. Quiet. Familiar. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just there. Like a door he already knew how to open. He leaned forward and gripped the sink until his knuckles went pale. Then he heard the front door open. A small voice. Daddy, I'm home. His daughter's laughter filled the apartment like sunlight. Daniel shut off the water. He stepped out of the bathroom, forcing his face into something neutral, something safe. She ran to him, holding a piece of paper. Look, she said, almost breathless. Look what I made. It was her drawing contest sheet. She'd drawn a man and a little girl standing under a giant yellow star. The star had a smile. The man looked tired, even in crayon, but the little girl was holding his hand like she was pulling him forward. Above them, in crooked letters, she'd written, My biggest dream is my daddy. Happy Daniel's throat tightened so fast it almost hurt. He crouched down and took the paper carefully, like it was fragile. His daughter watched him, waiting for his reaction. He couldn't speak right away. His hand shook slightly as he traced the letters with his thumb. Then he pulled her into his arms. She hugged him back without hesitation, squeezing hard. Did I win? She whispered. Daniel closed his eyes. No, he said quietly, voice rough. But you should. She giggled into his shoulder. And in that moment, holding her, he realized something that made his stomach drop. If he didn't take the chance, if he didn't fight for something bigger than survival, he wasn't just losing money. He was losing her future. He stood up slowly, still holding the paper. He walked to the kitchen table, sat down, and picked up his phone. His daughter climbed into the chair beside him, swinging her legs again. What you doing? She asked. Daniel stared at the screen, then at the drawing, then back at the screen. His thumb hovered over the call button. He didn't feel brave. He felt terrified. But he pressed it anyway. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then the woman answered. Regional Community Initiative Office. Daniel swallowed. "This is Daniel Ruiz," he said. I got your call." "Yes, Mr. Ruiz. Have you made your decision?" Daniel looked at his daughter. She was watching him closely now, like she understood more than she should. He forced his voice steady. "Yes," he said. A pause. "Proceed," the woman said gently. Daniel took a breath that felt too deep. "I accept." The silence on the line lasted a second longer than normal. Then the woman said, "Thank you. Your life is about to change." Daniel didn't answer, because he didn't know if she meant it in a good way. He only knew one thing. He just stepped into something he couldn't step out of, and his daughter was still smiling beside him, completely unaware of the storm he'd just invited into their home. They told him to report to City Hall at 8 the next morning. Bring identification, basic financial documents, dress appropriately, the woman said before ending the call. Dress appropriately. He stood in front of the closet that night longer than necessary. There were 3 button-down shirts left. One had a loose thread near the collar. One was too big now. The last one still held its shape. Pale blue, faint crease down the sleeves from a time when ironing had felt routine. He chose the blue one. His daughter watched him from the bed as he laid it out on the chair. "Are you going to a wedding?" she asked. "No." "A funeral?" He paused. "No." She considered that. Then it must be important. He didn't answer. He helped her brush her teeth, packed her backpack, signed a school paper he hadn't read fully. The drawing contest sheet sat on the table, edges curling slightly. He flattened it once with his palm before turning off the lights. That night he didn't sleep much. Every time he closed his eyes, something tugged at him. Not excitement, not fear, exactly. Just a sense of standing at the edge of something that could either hold him or swallow him whole. At 6:30 he was already dressed. He walked her to school like always, same cracked sidewalk, same hand in his. She talked about a spelling test, about how her friend Mia cheated by looking at the wall. He nodded at the right moments. At the gate, she hugged him quickly. "Don't be sad today," she said again. He crouched down so they were eye level. "I'm not sad." She tilted her head. "A little bit." He didn't argue. "I have something to do today," he said instead. "Is it a job?" "Maybe." Her eyes widened. "A big one. I don't know yet." She seemed satisfied with that. She ran inside without looking back this time. He stood there a moment longer than usual. Then he turned and headed downtown. City Hall was cleaner than he remembered. The glass doors reflected him, back-pressed shirt, worn shoes, shoulders squared tighter than usual. He looked like someone trying not to be seen. Inside, the floors were polished, too bright. His footsteps echoed. A woman at the front desk checked his name against a list and handed him a temporary badge. 3rd floor, conference room B. Her smile was polite, nothing more. The elevator felt slow. He could hear his heartbeat in the small metal box. When the doors opened, a man in a gray suit was already waiting outside the conference room. "Mr. Ruiz?" the man asked. Daniel nodded. "David Kim, program coordinator." They shook hands. David's grip was firm but not aggressive, measured. "Thank you for coming in on short notice," David said as he opened the door. Inside, there were 5 other people sitting around a long table. Daniel stopped at the threshold. They all looked steady. Clean shoes. Watches that didn't come from clearance racks. Postures that suggested they'd never had to count coins at a grocery register. A woman in a red blazer glanced at him briefly, then looked away. "Finalists," David said. "You've been selected from over 12,000 applicants. This program isn't a handout. It's an investment." Daniel took the empty seat at the end of the table. He folded his hands to stop them from moving. David continued. "Over the next 4 weeks, you'll complete a series of evaluations. Community engagement, fiscal planning, leadership under pressure. At the end, one of you will receive the full $10 million allocation. The number hung in the air like something unreal. Why not split it? The woman in red asked. David didn't smile. Because this isn't about distributing relief. It's about identifying capacity. Capacity. Daniel felt that word land somewhere heavy inside him. They handed out folders. Inside were schedules, consent forms, financial disclosure agreements. Cameras would follow certain events. Public transparency was mandatory. Background checks were already underway. Daniel's stomach tightened at that. He hadn't lied on his application. But he also hadn't explained everything. Medical debt. Late payments. The eviction notice that might be filed tomorrow. A man across the table raised his hand slightly. What happens if something in our background is complicated? He asked. David met his gaze evenly. Complicated how? Personal setbacks, credit issues. David folded his hands. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for resilience. However, undisclosed liabilities may impact public perception. Public perception. Daniel looked down at the papers. He didn't care about perception. He cared about Friday. The session lasted 2 hours, mostly information. Expectations, warnings about media attention. When it ended, David pulled Daniel aside. Mr. Ruiz. Daniel turned. You were placed on the waiting list originally because your proposal was underdeveloped, David said calmly. Community logistics hub, correct? Daniel nodded. He'd written about creating a local delivery network employing out-of-work drivers. It had felt half-formed at the time. Desperate, maybe. You have practical experience, David continued. But your financial outline was thin. I know, Daniel said. David studied him a second longer. Why did you apply? Daniel hesitated. Because I was drowning. Because I didn't know what else to do. Because my daughter deserves more than this. He didn't say any of that. I thought it might help, he said simply. David nodded once. The first challenge begins tomorrow afternoon. You'll receive details by email. Be prepared. For what? Daniel asked. David's expression didn't change. To show us who you are under strain. Daniel almost laughed at that. Under strain was the only way he existed lately. He left City Hall with the folder tucked under his arm. The sky looked the same as yesterday, pale, cloudless. He walked instead of taking the bus. Halfway home, his phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Grady. Reminder, Friday. Daniel stared at the text. Then another message came in, from an unknown number. Your participation has been announced. Local media may reach out for comment. His pulse quickened. Announced? He hadn't told anyone. He imagined a camera outside the apartment building, neighbors whispering, questions he didn't want to answer. He stopped walking. This wasn't quiet money. This was exposure. He thought about his daughter's school, about other parents, about the drawing she'd shown him. My biggest dream is my daddy happy. He ran a hand over his face. He could still back out. Maybe. He opened the email from the program office. Subject line, Challenge 1. Immediate allocation exercise. He read it standing on the sidewalk. Each finalist would be given temporary control over $100,000 in restricted funds. They had 48 hours to allocate it within the community in a way that demonstrated impact, sustainability, and ethical judgment. Every decision would be audited. Every receipt documented. The results would be reviewed publicly. Daniel read the line twice. $100,000, more money than he'd seen in years, and he couldn't use a single dollar for himself. His chest tightened. He kept reading. Any evidence of personal gain would result in immediate disqualification. He let out a slow breath. Of course, this wasn't about saving himself. It was about showing he could save something else. He resumed walking, slower now. By the time he reached his apartment building, there was already a small news van parked across the street. He stopped at the corner. A reporter stood near the entrance, checking her phone. Daniel's heart started pounding again. He could turn around, wait it out. But eventually, they'd knock. Eventually, someone would see him. He adjusted the folder under his arm and crossed the street. The reporter looked up immediately. "Mr. Ruiz?" He didn't answer. She stepped forward slightly. "Daniel Ruiz, you're one of the finalists for the Regional Community Initiative, correct?" He nodded once. "How does it feel to potentially win $10 million?" He swallowed. The camera behind her lifted. He saw the red light flick on. He thought about the eviction notice, about the unpaid school lunches, about the promise folded in a shoebox upstairs. "It feels," he said slowly, "like a responsibility." The reporter tilted her head. "Responsibility to who?" He glanced at the building behind him. "At home," he said. Then he walked past her without adding anything else. His hands were steady as he unlocked the apartment door. But once inside, once the door clicked shut, he leaned against it and closed his eyes. 48 hours. $100,000. And cameras watching. He hadn't even figured out how to pay 800 by Friday, and now the entire city might be watching him try to prove he deserved 10 million. He pushed off the door and walked to the kitchen table. He set the folder down. Then he sat, still, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, listening to his own breathing. The pressure wasn't abstract anymore. It had a clock. And it had witnesses. The email said the funds would be transferred to a temporary program account by noon the next day. Daniel read it again that night after his daughter fell asleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, the screen lighting up his face in the dark. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional creak of the pipes. He kept glancing toward her bedroom door, like the weight of the situation might leak under it. $100,000. And none of it could touch his rent. That was the part that kept twisting in him. Not anger, just something colder. A bitter kind of irony. He wasn't sure what the program expected. They wanted impact, sustainability, ethics. They wanted a person who could be trusted. But he didn't feel like a person anyone should trust with anything right now. He felt like a man who'd been holding his life together with thin thread, and now someone had decided to test the thread in public. He opened a blank document and started typing. Food banks, shelters, school supply drives, community center repairs. He stared at the words. They were too clean, too safe, too obvious. He deleted the whole thing. He leaned back and rubbed his eyes until they burned. The worst part was that he knew the city didn't need gestures. It needed structure. He'd worked in logistics long enough to understand how fragile systems were, how one delay could collapse an entire chain, how the smallest weak link could ruin everything. People always talked about poverty like it was one problem. It wasn't. It was 100 problems stacked on top of each other, all leaning. He got up and walked to the fridge, opened it, stared inside like an answer might be sitting on the shelf. He closed it again. Then he heard a soft sound behind him. "Daddy." He turned. His daughter stood in the hallway rubbing her eyes with one fist. Hair messy again. Rabbit tucked under her arm. He forced his face into something calm. "What are you doing up?" "I had a bad dream." He crouched down. "About what?" She shrugged. "I don't know. You were gone." His throat tightened. He held out his arms and she walked into them without hesitation. She smelled like soap and sleep. "You're okay," he said quietly. "I'm here." She rested her head against his shoulder, then pulled back to look at the laptop. "Are you working?" "A little." "Is it the big important thing?" Daniel hesitated. "Yeah." She yawned. "Can I help?" He almost said no, but something in her voice made him pause. It wasn't childish excitement. It was serious, like she meant it. He lifted her into the chair beside him. The laptop screen made her face look pale. "What are you doing?" she asked, trying to figure out what to do with some money. Her eyes widened instantly. "How much?" He hesitated, then said it anyway. 100,000. She stared at him like he'd said a number from outer space. "That's a lot." "It is." "Is it ours?" "No." Her face fell slightly. "It's money I have to use to help other people," he explained. She looked down at her rabbit, thinking, why? Daniel exhaled through his nose. Because if I do it right, someone might trust me with more. She looked back up. How much more? He didn't want to say it, but she already knew about the 10,000 from school. She was used to big numbers now, even if she didn't understand them. 10 million, he said quietly. She didn't react the way adults would. She didn't gasp. She didn't scream. She just blinked slowly. Then she said, "That's too much." Daniel almost laughed. The sound caught in his throat and died there. "Yeah," he murmured, "it is." She leaned forward and pointed at the screen. "Can we buy food for people?" "Yes." "Can we buy houses?" "Not with 100,000. She nodded, accepting it like a fact. Then she asked, "Can we fix the school lunch problem?" Daniel froze. "What?" She shrugged. "Some kids don't get lunch. The lunch lady makes them sit at the side table." Daniel's stomach turned. He felt stupid. He felt like he'd been blind. He stared at her. "How do you know that?" "Because sometimes Mia doesn't have lunch money." Daniel's hands tightened around the edge of the table. He'd been worried about his daughter's lunch fees. He hadn't thought about the other kids, the ones whose parents didn't even have the ability to worry. "How many kids?" he asked. She frowned, trying to remember. "Maybe 4 or 5. Daniel stared at the blank document again. He typed, "School lunch debt relief." His daughter watched him, and, she added, "Miss Turner said the library roof leaks. When it rains, they put buckets." Daniel's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "How do you know that?" She looked at him like it was obvious. "Because I go to school." Daniel swallowed. He typed, "School library repairs." She yawned again. "And the old man by the store," she said, "the one who always smells like pennies. He sleeps behind the trash." Daniel's eyes lifted. He knew who she meant. A homeless man named Calvin who sometimes stood near the bus stop with a cardboard sign. Daniel had avoided his eyes so many times he'd stopped noticing it. His daughter didn't avoid anything. Daniel typed, "Emergency shelter placement." He sat back slowly. His daughter leaned against him again. "You're making a list," she whispered. "Yeah, that's good." He stared at the screen, feeling something shift. Not relief, not hope. Something like direction. He kissed the top of her head gently. "Go back to bed," he said. She nodded and slid off the chair. Before she left the kitchen, she turned back. "Daddy." "Yeah." "If you get the big money, can we still stay here?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He didn't want to lie. He also didn't want to tell her the truth, that he didn't know if they'd still be here by next week. So he chose the safest thing he could say. "If I get the big money," he said quietly, "you'll never have to worry about that again." She stared at him for a second, then nodded like she believed him. Then she disappeared down the hallway. Daniel sat alone again. The apartment felt heavier now, like her question had pressed something into the walls. He looked at the list he'd started. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The next day at noon, the funds arrived. The program sent him access to an account, along with a handler named Rachel who would monitor compliance. Rachel called him within minutes. Her voice was sharp, efficient. "You have 48 hours, she said. "Every dollar must be documented. Every decision must be justified. You will be filmed during certain interactions. You will be asked to explain yourself. Do not improvise." Daniel stared at the phone. "I don't have a team," he said. "You are the team," Rachel replied. Then she hung up. He stood in the kitchen holding the phone, staring at the wall like it had insulted him. His daughter was at school. The apartment was silent again. He grabbed his keys and walked out. First stop was the school. He didn't call ahead. He didn't know who to talk to. He just went to the front office and asked for the principal. The secretary looked at him like he didn't belong. When he said his name, her expression changed slightly. Recognition. News travels fast. She made a call, then pointed him down the hallway. The principal, Mrs. Howard, met him in her office. She was polite, but guarded. like she expected him to ask for something selfish. Daniel didn't sit right away. "I need to ask you a question," he said. Mrs. Howard nodded. "Of course. How much lunch debt does this school have?" he asked. She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "How much money is owed by students who can't pay for lunches?" Her posture shifted, less guarded, more uncomfortable. "That information is sensitive." Daniel kept his voice level. "I'm not asking for names, just the number." She hesitated, then opened a file drawer and pulled out a folder. She flipped through papers, her lips pressing tighter as she read. "Approximately $37,000, she said quietly. Daniel felt something cold spread through his chest. 37,000, not a few kids. A whole section of the school. He pictured them sitting at that side table his daughter had mentioned. He swallowed hard. "I want to pay it," he said. "Mrs. Munner." Howard stared at him. "Mr. Ruiz, I want it gone," Daniel repeated. "All of it. No more side table. No more lunch shame." The principal's eyes softened slightly. Not gratitude. Something closer to disbelief. "That would be life-changing," she said. Daniel nodded once. "Good." He left the office with the paperwork needed to process it. Outside, he sat in his car for a moment and stared at the steering wheel. He hadn't felt proud. He hadn't felt heroic. He felt angry. Angry that it existed at all. Angry that he hadn't known. Angry that his daughter had been the one to point it out. He drove next to a small construction supply company and asked for quotes to repair the library roof. Then he went to a local nonprofit that handled emergency housing. They recognized him immediately. A young volunteer offered him coffee. Another one asked if he could take a selfie. Daniel said no. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain. He just said no. He met with the director, a tired woman with sharp eyes. "I need to place as many people as possible," Daniel said, "but I want it structured, not temporary motel rooms that disappear in 2 weeks." The director nodded slowly. "You're talking about transitional housing," she said. "Support services. Jobs. Stability." Daniel leaned forward. "Yes." The director studied him for a long moment. "Most people who walk in here with money want to feel good," she said. "You don't look like you're trying to feel good." Daniel didn't answer. Because she was right. He wasn't trying to feel good. He was trying to fix something before it swallowed him again. He signed papers, allocated funds, set aside a portion for job placement support. By evening, his head was pounding. He drove home with receipts in the passenger seat like they were fragile. When he got inside, his daughter was sitting on the floor drawing again. She looked up. "Did you help people?" Daniel sat down slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I did." She smiled and went back to coloring. Daniel leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. For the first time in months, the weight in his chest loosened slightly. Not because his problems were solved. They weren't. But because he'd done something that mattered. Something that wasn't just survival. Then his phone buzzed again. A new message. "Medea Tomtro. Publish review. Attendance require." Daniel stared at the screen. The relief drained out of him instantly. He looked at his daughter on the floor humming softly to herself, coloring her sun-yellow crayons into the page like the world couldn't hurt her. And he realized the hardest part wasn't the money. It was the watching, the judging, the part where strangers would decide whether he deserved to live with dignity. He set the phone down carefully, like it might explode, and he sat there until his daughter fell asleep on the carpet beside him, still holding her crayon. The next morning, he woke up with his jaw clenched. His daughter was still asleep, sprawled sideways on her bed with her rabbit under her chin. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe. The room smelled like crayons and the strawberry shampoo she used. Something about it made his chest tighten. He didn't wake her right away. He went to the kitchen and opened the drawer where he'd shoved all the receipts from the day before. They were wrinkled from being folded and unfolded too many times. He laid them out on the table and smoothed them with his palms. Lunch debt payment agreement. Roof repair deposit. Nonprofit funding allocation. Transitional housing support. Every signature was his. Every dollar had gone where it was supposed to. Still, his stomach felt sick, because none of it mattered if the public decided it looked wrong. He made toast for his daughter and cut it into triangles. He didn't know why he did that. It was something his wife used to do. He hadn't done it in years. When his daughter came into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, she noticed immediately. "Fancy toast?" she said. He shrugged. "We're celebrating." "What are we celebrating?" Daniel looked down at the plate, then at her face. "That we made it to today." She didn't understand, but she nodded anyway, like she trusted him enough not to question it. After he dropped her at school, he didn't go straight to the media event. He drove to the nonprofit again. He wanted to check something, confirm things were real. The director met him in the lobby. "You look worse today," she said bluntly. Daniel didn't smile. "I need names," he replied. She raised an eyebrow. "You're not allowed to have names," she said. "That's what you told me yesterday." Daniel nodded. "Not names of people, names of suppliers, contractors, service providers. I need everything clean." She stared at him for a moment, then gestured him into her office. "You're scared," she said once the door closed. Daniel sat down slowly. His knee bounced under the desk. "I'm not scared," he said automatically. The director didn't argue. She just slid a folder toward him. "This is everything," she said. "Invoices, vendor contracts, service schedules." Daniel opened the folder. His hands were steady, but his eyes moved too fast, like he was searching for a trap. Everything looked legitimate. He exhaled through his nose, but the tension didn't leave. The director leaned back in her chair. "You know what they're going to do, right?" she asked. Daniel didn't look up. "They're going to twist it," she continued. "They'll ask why you didn't spend more on the homeless, or why you spent too much. They'll say you should have used it for schools instead, or food banks. There's no version where everyone claps." Daniel closed the folder. "I don't need everyone," he said quietly. The director's gaze sharpened. "Then who do you need?" Daniel's throat tightened. He thought of his daughter's face when she asked if they'd still live here. He thought of the side table in the cafeteria. He thought of Calvin behind the trash cans. "I need it to be right," he said. The director nodded slowly. "That's the closest thing to a good answer I've heard in years." Daniel left with the folder tucked under his arm like it was armor. The media event was at the Civic Center, a large open space with rows of chairs and a stage with a banner stretched across it. "Regional Community in Italia. Finalist Rivi Daniel parked 2 blocks away so nobody would see him getting out of the car." It was instinct, a habit from years of not wanting attention. As he walked toward the entrance, he could already hear voices, a low crowd murmur, camera shutters, someone laughing too loudly. Inside, the air smelled like perfume and old carpet. There were people everywhere. Local reporters, a few bloggers holding microphones, volunteers wearing program shirts, a couple of city officials shaking hands for the cameras. Daniel's name badge was waiting at the front desk. When the woman handed it to him, she smiled too wide. "Good luck," she said. He pinned it to his shirt anyway. He saw the other finalists near the stage. The woman in the red blazer was talking to a news crew, smiling like she'd rehearsed her face in the mirror. The man in a suit was laughing with someone, gesturing with open hands like he already owned the room. Another finalist stood quietly, but even he looked composed. Daniel felt like he was wearing the wrong skin. David Kim spotted him and walked over. "Mr. Ruiz," he said, nodding. Daniel nodded back. David's eyes flicked to the folder in Daniel's hands. "Prepared," David observed. Daniel didn't respond. David lowered his voice. "This is not an interrogation," he said, "but it will feel like one." Daniel looked at him then. "What do they want?" he asked quietly. David hesitated. "Authenticitated," he said finally. "And a story they can believe." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to entertain anyone," he said. David's expression stayed neutral. "No," he agreed. "You're not." Then he walked away. Daniel stood near the back of the room waiting. He didn't like crowds. Not because he was shy, but because crowds made him feel like he could be crushed without anyone noticing. The event started. A woman with a microphone stepped on stage and welcomed everyone. She spoke about opportunity, about building a better future, about responsible leadership. Her words were smooth, too smooth. Daniel barely listened. He watched the crowd instead. He noticed a man in the third row leaning toward another, whispering, eyes flicking to Daniel's badge. He noticed someone pointing. He noticed the way the cameras shifted when Daniel moved. Then they began calling finalists one by one. The first finalist walked up confidently, spoke about allocating funds to small business grants. He smiled. People nodded. Applause. The woman in red talked about expanding after-school programs and mental health support. She used the right phrases. The crowd clapped harder. Then Daniel's name was called. He didn't stand right away. He felt his pulse in his throat. He walked to the stage, each step heavier than the last. He could feel eyes on him like heat. He stopped at the microphone. The room went quiet. The host smiled politely. "Mr. Ruiz," she said, "you chose to allocate the majority of your funds towards school lunch debt relief and transitional housing. Can you explain why?" Daniel's mouth felt dry. He glanced down at the crowd. Somewhere in the back, he saw a camera lens fixed on him like a staring eye. He cleared his throat once. "I didn't know the school had lunch debt," he said. A few murmurs. The host blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness. "You didn't know," she repeated. Daniel shook his head. "My daughter told me," he said. Silence again, different this time. He continued, slower. "She said kids were being separated, sitting at a different table because they couldn't pay, and I didn't know that was happening." He felt his hands tighten at his sides. "So I paid it," he said. The host smiled gently as if to soften the moment. "And the transitional housing allocation?" Daniel swallowed. "There's a man near the corner store where we live," he said. "He sleeps behind the trash. My daughter sees him every day." His voice almost cracked on the last word. He forced it steady. "She doesn't look away. She asks questions. And I realized I've been looking away." A faint shifting in the crowd. People adjusting in their seats. The host nodded slowly. "That's very honest," she said. Daniel didn't respond, because honesty wasn't the point. The point was whether it would be used against him. A reporter stood up. "Mr. Ruiz," he called out. "Some critics might say you made emotional decisions rather than strategic ones. How do you respond to that?" Daniel stared at him. The reporter's tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was hungry. Daniel felt the anger rise. Not loud anger. Quiet, sharp anger. He leaned slightly toward the microphone. "People think strategy means you stop seeing faces," he said. "It doesn't. Strategy is making sure the money doesn't disappear in 2 weeks. Strategy is fixing the leak so the whole building doesn't rot." His hands were trembling now. He didn't hide it. "And I don't care what critics think," he added, voice low. "I care what happens after the cameras leave." The room went still. The host's smile tightened slightly, but she recovered. "Thank you, Mr. Ruiz," she said quickly. "We appreciate your participation." Daniel stepped away from the microphone and walked off the stage. He didn't look at anyone as he returned to the back of the room, but he could feel it. The shift. He wasn't just another finalist anymore. He was the unstable one, the emotional one, the one people would either root for or tear apart. As he reached the exit, his phone buzzed. A message from his landlord. "If you don't have the money by Friday, I'm filing. No more delays." Daniel stared at it until his vision blurred. He slipped the phone into his pocket and walked out into the sunlight. Outside, the air was colder than he expected. The sky looked too open. He leaned against the wall of the civic center and closed his eyes. For a few seconds, he let his head fall back. He didn't want to go home yet. He didn't want to face the apartment. He didn't want to face his daughter's questions. Because now he was carrying something else too. Not just poverty. Not just desperation. Expectation. and expectation was heavier. He opened his eyes when he heard footsteps approaching. A man in a suit stood nearby holding a phone. He wasn't part of the program staff. Daniel recognized him from the crowd. He'd been in the third row. The man smiled politely. "Mr. Ruiz," he said, stepping closer. "My name is Vincent Hale. I represent a private investment group." Daniel didn't move. Vincent's smile stayed fixed. "We've been watching you," Vincent continued. "You have a compelling public image. People like you. That's valuable." Daniel's stomach tightened. "I'm not selling anything," Daniel said. Vincent chuckled softly, like Daniel had made a joke. "You're already selling," he replied. "You just don't know it yet." Daniel's hands curled into fists. Vincent lowered his voice. "Listen," he said. "If you win the 10 million, you'll be overwhelmed. Taxes, obligations, community demands. You'll need guidance. Protection. We can provide that." Daniel stared at him. "What do you want?" he asked. Vincent's eyes flicked briefly, like he was measuring Daniel's resistance. "A partnership," he said smoothly. "A percentage, in exchange for security." Daniel felt his pulse spike. He took a step back. "I didn't ask for you," he said. Vincent held up his hands slightly. "No need to be defensive," he said. "I'm offering help. You're a single father. You're under pressure. You don't have time to make mistakes." Daniel's jaw clenched harder. Vincent stepped closer again, voice softer. "And if you don't win," he said, "you still have a problem, don't you? Rent. Bills. Eviction." Daniel's stomach dropped. The man's tone was too casual, too informed. Daniel stared at him, cold spreading through his chest. "How do you know about that?" Daniel asked. Vincent smiled again. "I know a lot," he said. "That's why I'm useful." Daniel didn't answer. Vincent slipped a business card into Daniel's hand, pressing it there like he owned the space between them. "Think about it," he said, "because I promise you, the program isn't as clean as they want people to believe." Then he walked away. Daniel stood there with the card in his hand. It felt dirty. He stared at it until the letters blurred. Then he crumpled it slowly and shoved it into his pocket anyway. Not because he wanted it, because he needed to remember the name. He drove to pick up his daughter with his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. When she climbed into the car, she was smiling. "Daddy, guess what?" He forced his voice steady. "What?" "I got an A on my spelling test." He nodded. "That's great." She frowned slightly. "You don't sound happy." He swallowed. "I am happy," he said. She leaned closer, studying his face. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small paper star. She handed it to him carefully. "I made this for you," she said, "so you don't get lost." Daniel stared at the paper star. It was folded unevenly. The edges weren't sharp, but it held its shape. He held it in his palm like it was fragile. Something in his chest tightened. Not because it was sweet, because it felt like she knew. Because it felt like she was trying to keep him anchored. He slipped it into his shirt pocket. "I won't get lost," he said quietly. But he didn't believe it. Not fully, because now he understood something he hadn't yesterday. The money wasn't the danger, the people around it were. And they were already moving closer. That night, he didn't turn on the television. He didn't check social media. He knew clips from the event would be circulating already. He could picture the headlines: "Emotional finalist calls out system." Or worse, "Single dad makes risky allocation choice." He didn't need to see it. His daughter sat cross-legged on the floor, building a small tower out of mismatched blocks. The pieces didn't fit perfectly, but she made them fit anyway. Daniel watched her from the couch. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "Am I?" "Yes." He leaned forward and picked up one of the extra blocks. "What are you building?" he asked. "A city," she said. "For who?" "For everyone." She placed another block carefully on top. "It has to be strong," she added, "or it falls." Daniel's chest tightened at that. He set the block down slowly. After she went to bed, he finally checked his phone. There were dozens of notifications, missed calls from unknown numbers, 2 voicemails. He ignored those. Instead, he opened a news link someone had texted him. A clip of him on stage. His own face filled the screen. Jaw tight, eyes tired. He watched himself say the words again. "I've been looking away." He hadn't realized how raw it sounded. The comments below the clip were split. Some praised him. Some mocked him. One comment stood out. "Emotion doesn't build systems. Discipline does." Daniel stared at that sentence longer than the others. Emotion doesn't build systems. He thought about the library roof, about invoices, about transitional housing contracts. Emotion might have pointed him somewhere, but he'd built something structured. Still, doubt crept in quietly. He closed the app and set the phone face down. Then it buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "You should have taken the offer." His pulse spiked. He read it twice. No signature, no context. But he knew who it was. Vincent. Daniel didn't respond. A second message followed. "The background checks are thorough. Hope you disclosed everything." His throat went dry. He felt the old panic rising, slow and suffocating. He stood up and paced the kitchen. There was nothing illegal in his history, nothing criminal. But shame had a way of feeling like guilt. Late payments, debt collectors, hospital bills he'd negotiated down and still couldn't pay, eviction threats. Would they see that as resilience or as instability? He grabbed his laptop and opened the program portal. There was a new notification. Preliminary public feedback score pending review. Below it, a smaller line, financial disclosure clarification requested. His stomach dropped. He clicked it. A request for additional documentation regarding outstanding liabilities and pending civil actions. Civil actions. He stared at the words. They were talking about the eviction notice. Mystery after. Grady hadn't filed yet. But if he did. Daniel closed the laptop slowly. His hands were shaking again. He walked to the bathroom and splashed water on his face. In the mirror, he looked like someone cornered. Not by poverty this time. By visibility. He went to the bedroom and stood in the doorway again. His daughter was asleep, one arm hanging off the bed. He stepped inside quietly and adjusted her blanket. For a moment he just stood there. Then he whispered, barely audible, "I'm trying." The next morning, he went straight to see Mr. Grady. The landlord opened the door halfway, like Daniel was a salesman. "I don't have it yet," Daniel said before Grady could speak. Grady's expression hardened. "Then I'm filing." Daniel took a breath. "I need 2 weeks. You've had 2 months." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm in the middle of something," he said. Grady scoffed. "I saw you on TV." Daniel blinked. "You looked real noble," Grady continued, "helping strangers." Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. "That money isn't mine," he said. Grady shrugged. "Doesn't matter. We're still late." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you file, it becomes public record," he said. "It affects the program." Grady stared at him. And if I win," Daniel continued, forcing the words out evenly, "I'll pay everything, all of it, immediately." Grady's eyes narrowed. "That's a big if." Daniel nodded once. "Yes." They stood there in silence. Finally, Grady sighed. 1 week, he said. "Not 2. Daniel exhaled slowly. 1 week, he agreed. As he walked back to his car, his phone buzzed again. Another email from the program. "Community voting opens tonight. Top 2 finalists will advance." His stomach turned. Voting. He hadn't expected that. This wasn't just evaluation by a board. It was popularity. He drove home in silence. When he walked inside, his daughter was sitting at the table with a serious expression. "There's a lady outside," she said. Daniel's heart jumped. "What lady?" "She has a camera." He walked to the window and glanced through the curtain. A reporter stood across the street, speaking into a microphone. Daniel stepped back immediately. "They're talking about you," his daughter said. He forced a calm tone. It's just for a few days. She tilted her head. Did you do something wrong? The question hit harder than anything online. No, he said quickly. No, I didn't. She watched his face carefully. Then she nodded once, satisfied for now. He crouched down in front of her. Remember when you said your biggest dream was me happy? He asked. She smiled slightly. Yeah. Well, he said quietly. Sometimes being happy means doing hard things first. She considered that. Like cleaning your room? She asked. He almost laughed. Something like that. That evening, the voting link went live. Daniel didn't share it. He didn't post about it. He didn't ask for support. He sat on the couch while his daughter colored beside him and tried not to think about numbers ticking upward somewhere on a server. Around 9, his phone buzzed. A call from David Kim. Daniel stepped into the kitchen to answer. Mr. Ruiz, David said. His tone was measured. Yes, there's concern about your financial disclosure. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. I submitted everything, he said. Yes, David replied. But the pending eviction filing, it hasn't been filed, Daniel cut in. Not yet, David agreed, but it's a liability. Daniel gripped the edge of the counter. I'm not hiding it, he said. I know, David said. That's not the issue. Then what is? There was a pause. The issue, David said carefully, is whether someone in your position can responsibly manage $10 million. The words felt like a punch. Daniel didn't speak. David continued. The board is divided. Some see your situation as proof of resilience. Others see it as instability. Daniel's throat tightened. I've never misused a dollar, he said quietly. That's not the concern, David replied. The concern is pressure. Daniel almost laughed. Pressure. They had no idea. I live under pressure, he said. Yes, David replied softly. That's exactly the point. The call ended shortly after. Daniel stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the dark window. His reflection looked smaller somehow. Not weaker. Just tired. His daughter padded into the room. Is everything okay? She asked. He nodded automatically. She studied him. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small paper star she'd made. She held it up between them. I made another one, she said, in case you lose the first. Daniel stared at the star. His vision blurred slightly. He crouched down and took it from her. His voice was rough when he spoke. I won't lose it, he said. But inside, something was shifting. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It wasn't even about money. It was about whether he would let other people define what he was capable of. He tucked the star into his pocket, and for the first time since this started, he felt something solid underneath the fear. Not confidence, not certainty, just a line he wouldn't cross. He would not beg. He would not sell himself to Vincent Hale, and he would not let shame decide his worth, even if it cost him everything. He stood up slowly. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you to bed. As he turned off the lights, he felt the weight of the week pressing down harder. 1 week until the eviction deadline. Public voting underway. Board divided. Investors circling. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a little girl who believed he could build a strong city out of uneven blocks. He didn't know if he would win. But he knew one thing now. He wasn't stepping back. Not anymore. By the next morning, the street felt different. Not louder. Not busier. Just watched. Daniel noticed it the moment he stepped outside. A car parked across the road that hadn't been there yesterday. Someone sitting inside, head tilted down like they were looking at their phone, but their eyes flicked up too quickly when Daniel glanced over. He didn't know if it was paranoia or reality. He didn't want to know. He walked his daughter to school anyway. She skipped ahead, backpack bouncing. She didn't see the car, or she did, and didn't care. Kids had a way of treating the world like it would always stay in place. At the gate, she turned and hugged him. Do you have to go to the big money place again? She asked. Probably, he said. Okay, she replied. like it was the same as him going to the grocery store. Then she leaned in and whispered, "Don't forget your stars." He touched his pocket. 2 folded paper stars were there, one from yesterday, one from the night before. He nodded. "I won't." She ran inside. Daniel stayed at the gate for a moment, watching the doors close behind her. Then he turned around. The car across the street was still there. He forced himself not to look again. He walked home fast. The program email came at 10. Challenge 2. Community response ender were 6 wonder serious conditions. The words made his stomach tighten. He clicked it. A simulation. A staged emergency. Finalists would be placed in a controlled scenario and evaluated on decision-making, leadership, communication, and ethical handling of limited resources. It was scheduled for that afternoon. Daniel stared at the screen. A staged emergency. It sounded like something out of a training video. Something safe. But the program didn't feel safe anymore. He printed the email and read it twice, like the paper would reveal something the screen didn't. Then he heard a knock at the door. Sharp. Quick. Confident. He froze. Another knock. He walked to the door slowly and looked through the peephole. A woman stood outside. Late 20s, maybe. Hair pulled back tight. A clipboard in one hand. Camera crew behind her. Daniel's chest tightened. He opened the door halfway. "Mr. Ruiz?" she asked, already smiling. "Yes. I'm Tara Jensen with Channel 7 News," she said brightly. "We're doing a piece on the finalists. Can we ask you a few questions about your living situation?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Behind her, the cameraman adjusted his lens, already pointing it at the doorway. Tara's smile widened. "People are really connecting with your story," she said. "Single father, hardworking, struggling, but still giving. It's inspiring." Daniel felt something cold in his stomach. "Inspiring," he repeated. "Yes," she said quickly. "You represent hope for a lot of families." Daniel looked at the camera, then back at Tara. "I'm not doing this," he said. Tara blinked. "Excuse me, I'm not letting you film my home," he repeated. Her smile faltered for a second, then returned. "Mr. Ruiz, with respect, your name is already public. People are curious. This could help your voting numbers." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So this is about votes," he said. Tara laughed lightly, like he'd misunderstood. "It's about transparency," she corrected. Daniel stared at her. "You don't want transparency," he said quietly. "You want a story that sells." The air shifted. Tara's smile hardened now, more professional than friendly. "Are you refusing to comment?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Tara tilted her head. "Then I have to ask," she said, voice lowering slightly, "what are you hiding?" Daniel felt the anger rise again. Controlled, but hot. He opened the door a little wider. "I'm hiding my daughter," he said. Tara's eyes flicked, momentarily thrown off. "She didn't sign up for this," Daniel continued. "I did." Tara held her clipboard tighter. "Your daughter is part of your public image," she said. Daniel stared at her like she'd slapped him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward. He just said very quietly, "Get away from my door." The cameraman shifted awkwardly. Tara's face flushed. "Fine," she snapped, turning sharply. "But people don't like secrecy, Mr. Ruiz. They start imagining things." Daniel watched them walk away. When the elevator doors closed behind them, he stood in the hallway, breathing hard. He didn't feel victorious. He felt exposed anyway. He went back inside and locked the door. Then he slid down against it and sat on the floor for a moment. His hands were shaking. He hated that. He hated that he couldn't protect her from being turned into a headline. He got up and went to the kitchen sink, running cold water over his wrists until the shaking eased. His phone buzzed. A message from Vincent Hale. "Smart move. The media is poison. But you're making enemies." Daniel stared at the message. He didn't reply. He blocked the number. His finger hovered over the screen afterward like he expected another message to appear anyway. Then his phone buzzed again. Not Vincent. A call from David Kim. Daniel answered immediately. "Mr. Ruiz," David said, voice tighter than usual. "Where are you?" "At home." "You're scheduled to arrive at the crisis simulation site in 1 hour," David said. "Please tell me you're coming." Daniel swallowed. "I'm coming." David hesitated. "Be careful," he said quietly. Daniel frowned. "Careful of what?" David didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Some of the other finalists are playing aggressively. They're using narrative, public sympathy. They're looking for weaknesses." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm not playing," Daniel said. David exhaled. "That's what worries me," he said. "See you soon." The call ended. Daniel drove to the simulation site with his hands gripping the wheel tightly. It was set up at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, temporary fencing around it, security guards at the entrance, a row of vans and cameras parked outside. As Daniel stepped out of his car, he saw the other finalists gathering near the entrance. The woman in the red blazer, her name was Celeste, he'd learned, was laughing with a small group of reporters, comfortable as if she belonged there. The suited man, Jared, was shaking hands with someone Daniel didn't recognize. They all looked ready. Daniel felt like he'd walked into a place where everyone else understood the rules. David Kim met him at the gate. "You made it," David said. Daniel nodded. David handed him a headset. "This will connect you to the simulation coordinators," he explained. "Your actions will be timed. Observers will be monitoring." Daniel took the headset and put it on. A voice crackled through immediately. "Finalists, please proceed inside. Scenario begins in 10 minutes." Daniel followed the group into the warehouse. Inside, it was staged like a disaster site. Fake smoke, flickering lights, broken furniture, volunteers dressed as injured civilians, some crying, some yelling, a few lying still on the ground. Daniel's stomach tightened. Even staged, it hit something primal. He'd been in a real emergency once. The night his wife collapsed. The hospital lights, the smell of antiseptic, the sound of monitors. His chest tightened as the memory brushed past. A loud horn sounded. The voice in his head spoke again. "Scenario, gas explosion in a residential building, multiple injuries, limited medical supplies, limited evacuation transport. Your job is to coordinate response and resource allocation." Daniel's throat went dry. Volunteers began screaming louder. A woman grabbed Daniel's arm suddenly. "My baby is inside," she cried. "Please, help." Daniel froze for half a second. Then he forced himself to move. He scanned the room quickly. He saw Celeste already kneeling beside a volunteer, speaking calmly, directing others like she'd trained for it. Jared was shouting orders, pointing at people, taking charge loudly. Daniel didn't want to shout. But silence wouldn't work here. He stepped toward a group of volunteers acting as paramedics. "What supplies do you have?" he asked. One of them looked at his clipboard. 2 trauma kits, limited oxygen, 4 stretchers. Daniel nodded. "Who's in charge of transport?" he asked. A coordinator pointed to a corner where a mock ambulance was staged. "Only 1 vehicle," the coordinator said. "It can take 2 people at a time." Daniel's mind moved fast. 2 people at a time. Multiple injuries. He looked around at the victims. Some were screaming. Some were quiet. The quiet ones scared him more. He crouched beside a man lying on the floor, eyes half open. "What's your name?" Daniel asked. The volunteer blinked slowly. "Cal," he whispered. Daniel's chest tightened. Cal. He didn't know if it was coincidence or part of the script, but it hit him anyway. He checked the man's pulse the way he remembered from a first aid class years ago. Weak. Daniel stood up and looked around. He raised his voice just enough to carry. "Everyone who can walk, stand up and move to the left wall," he called. "Now." Some volunteers hesitated. He repeated it, louder, "Move." They began shifting. Celeste glanced over at him, eyes narrowing slightly like she was measuring his command. Daniel ignored her. He turned to the paramedics. "Use the stretchers for anyone unconscious or unable to walk," he said. "Focus on airway and bleeding. Don't waste supplies on people who are stable." A coordinator scribbled notes. Daniel moved quickly, stepping around debris. A volunteer woman screamed suddenly. "My leg!" she cried, clutching her thigh. Daniel knelt beside her. Blood fake but convincing soaked her pants. She grabbed his wrist. "Don't leave me," she said, voice shaking. Daniel looked at her face. He saw panic there. Real panic. Even if it was acting. He forced his voice steady. "I'm not leaving you," he said, "but I need you to breathe." He looked up and waved a paramedic over. "Tourniquet," he ordered. "Now." The paramedic hesitated, glancing at their limited kit. Daniel's eyes hardened. "Now," he repeated. The paramedic complied. As they worked, Daniel's headset crackled. "Time update, 9 minutes remaining." 9 minutes. It wasn't enough. He stood and scanned again. A child volunteer sat in the corner, rocking back and forth, face streaked with soot makeup. Daniel's chest tightened. He walked toward the child. As he approached, the child looked up, eyes wide. "Where's my dad?" the child whispered. Daniel froze. For a second, he wasn't in the warehouse. He was back in the hospital hallway, his daughter asleep in a chair, nurses walking past, his wife behind a door that wouldn't open again. He swallowed hard. He crouched in front of the child. "Hey," he said softly, "what's your name?" The child's lips trembled. "Emma." Daniel nodded slowly. "Emma," he repeated, "listen to me. You're going to walk with me, okay?" The child shook her head. "I can't." Daniel's voice stayed low. "You can," he said, "because I'm here." He held out his hand. The child stared at it, then took it. Daniel helped her stand. As he led her toward the safe zone, he saw Jared across the room yelling at someone. "Move! Move! Stop crying!" The volunteer he was yelling at flinched. Daniel felt anger flare, not because Jared was wrong to push urgency, because he was careless with people. Daniel guided Emma to the left wall, then turned back toward the injured. His headset crackled again. Scenario escalation, secondary fire, smoke increasing, evacuation time reduced. Fake smoke poured from vents. The lights flickered harder. People screamed louder. Daniel's breathing quickened. He looked at the stretchers. Only 2 had been loaded. Too slow. He grabbed a chair, dragged it across the floor, and slammed it against a pile of debris blocking a path. It shifted. He shoved again until the path opened. "Use this exit," he shouted. "Single line, don't run." His voice echoed in the warehouse. Celeste glanced at him again, then began directing her group toward the exit Daniel had cleared. For a moment, Daniel saw respect flicker across her face. Then the horn sounded again. The simulation ended. The screaming stopped abruptly. The smoke machines shut off. Volunteers stood up, wiping soot makeup from their faces, laughing nervously. Daniel stood still in the middle of the warehouse. His chest was rising and falling too fast. His hands were shaking. He didn't like that they were shaking. David Kim approached him from the side. "You did well," David said quietly. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't yet. Because it hadn't felt like a game. It had felt like something he'd lived through already. He removed the headset slowly. Then he heard applause. The observers and staff were clapping lightly, polite and controlled. Daniel stared at them. He didn't feel proud. He felt sick. As the finalists were escorted outside, Daniel noticed the cameras waiting again. Reporters stepped forward. "Mr. Ruiz," someone called. How did it feel to be in a crisis situation? Daniel kept walking. A reporter shoved a microphone closer. "Do you think your emotional approach will help or hurt you?" Daniel stopped. He turned slightly. His eyes were tired but steady. "It's not emotional," he said. "It's human." Then he walked past them. But as he reached his car, he saw Vincent Hale leaning casually against a black sedan nearby. Vincent smiled, like he'd been waiting. Daniel's stomach tightened. Vincent pushed off the car and approached slowly. "You impressed them," Vincent said. "You are the people's favorite now." Daniel didn't answer. Vincent leaned closer. "But you're also a threat," he continued. "And threats get handled." Daniel's hands clenched. "Stay away from me," Daniel said. Vincent chuckled softly. I can't, he replied. Not if you want to win. Daniel stared at him. Vincent's smile faded slightly. Someone filed an anonymous tip about you, Vincent said. About your eviction. About your debt. About your instability. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Vincent shrugged like it was nothing. It's already in the board's hands, he said. You have maybe 24 hours before they decide you're too risky. Daniel's throat went dry. He didn't speak. Vincent stepped closer. You need protection, he said. Someone who knows how these systems really work. Someone who can bury narratives before they spread. Daniel's eyes narrowed. And you're that someone. Vincent smiled again. For a percentage, he said. Daniel stared at him. He could feel his pulse in his ears. He could feel the pressure tightening around his life like a rope, and he hated that the man was right about one thing. He didn't have 24 hours to be proud. He had 24 hours to survive. Daniel opened his car door. Vincent's voice followed him, calm and certain. Call me before it's too late, he said. Daniel got into the car and slammed the door. He sat there for a moment, breathing hard. Then he drove away. His hands were shaking so badly he had to pull over 2 blocks later. He gripped the steering wheel and stared out at the road. He didn't know what scared him more, losing the 10 million or realizing how easily people could twist his life into something ugly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded paper star. He held it between his fingers, staring at it like it could anchor him. Then he whispered, barely audible, Don't let me mess this up. He didn't tell her. When he picked his daughter up from school that afternoon, he didn't mention Vincent. He didn't mention the anonymous tip. He didn't mention the word instability echoing in his head like something stamped across his file. She ran toward him with a folded sheet of paper in her hand. I'm in the finals, she shouted. He blinked. For the drawing? She nodded hard. They picked 5. Daniel forced a smile that felt real for half a second. That's amazing. She held the paper out to him. A note from her teacher. The finalist drawings would be displayed in the auditorium on Friday. Parents invited. Friday. The word hit him like something physical. Friday was also his deadline. He folded the note carefully. I'll be there, he said. She didn't hear the weight in his voice. Or she did, and chose not to. At home, the street was empty again. No camera crew. No parked sedan. That worried him more than if they'd been there. Inside, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, staring at the program portal. There was a new update. Board review meeting. 8 m. To Omero. No details. No context. He knew what it meant. They were going to decide whether the anonymous tip disqualified him before the final round. His daughter was coloring on the floor again. He watched her quietly for a minute. Then he stood and walked to the bedroom closet. He pulled down the shoebox again. He hadn't opened the birthday card in years. He sat on the edge of the bed and finally unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky. You don't have to be perfect, she had written. You just have to stay. He read that line twice. Stay. Not win. Not fix everything. Stay. He pressed the card flat against his knee until the paper bent. Then he put it back carefully. When he returned to the kitchen, his daughter looked up. You look like you cried, she said. I didn't. She narrowed her eyes. A little. He sat across from her. I need to tell you something, he said. She put her crayon down immediately. That sounds serious. He nodded once. There are people who don't want me to win, he said. She frowned. Why? Because they think I'm not stable. She tilted her head. What's that? He struggled for a word she'd understand. They think I might fall over. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't fall over, she said. I almost did, he replied quietly. She didn't know what he meant. She leaned forward and put her small hand on the table between them. Then don't, she said. He stared at her hand. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't inspiring. It was simple. Then his phone buzzed. An email. Supplemental hearing required. Attendance. Mandatory. His jaw tightened. Tomorrow morning wasn't just a meeting. It was a hearing. He closed the laptop. That night, he barely slept. Every sound in the apartment felt louder. Pipes shifting. Wind against the window. A car door slamming outside. He lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought about Vincent's offer. Protection. Buried narratives. He imagined signing something that tied him to a man who spoke in percentages and threats. He imagined explaining that to his daughter someday. No. He sat up suddenly, heart pounding. He wasn't going to beg. He wasn't going to hide. If they wanted to call him unstable, he would stand there and let them look him in the eye while they said it. The next morning, he wore the blue shirt again. He walked his daughter to school in silence. At the gate, she hugged him tighter than usual. "Win," she whispered. He didn't correct her. "I'll try," he said. City Hall felt colder than before. The third-floor conference room was smaller this time. No audience, no cameras. Just a long table and 6 board members seated behind it. David stood off to the side, expression unreadable. Daniel took the empty chair across from them. A woman with silver hair adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Friend, Ruiz," she began. "We've received information regarding your current financial liabilities." Daniel nodded once. "Yes." Specifically, she continued, a pending eviction due to unpaid rent. Daniel kept his hands flat on the table. "Yes." Another board member leaned forward. "Why was this not disclosed in your original application?" "It wasn't filed at the time," Daniel replied. "And I wasn't hiding it." The silver-haired woman studied him. "Do you believe someone facing eviction is prepared to responsibly manage $10 million? The question hung there. He could feel David watching him. He didn't rush. He didn't get defensive. He let the silence stretch until it felt uncomfortable. Then he said, "Yes." The board members exchanged brief glances. "On what basis?" one asked. Daniel swallowed. "Because I know what it's like to have nothing," he said. "Because I've had to make decisions with $5 left in my wallet. Because I've learned what matters." Another board member spoke up. "Desperation can cloud judgment." Daniel nodded slightly. "It can," he agreed. "So can comfort." Silence. He continued, voice steady. "I didn't use the 100,000 to solve my own problem," he said. "I could have tried to manipulate it. I didn't. I paid school lunch debt. I funded transitional housing. I fixed a roof that's been leaking for years." He leaned forward slightly. "I did that while knowing I might lose my apartment." The room went quiet. The silver-haired woman folded her hands. "Why didn't you accept outside assistance?" she asked. Daniel knew what she meant. "Vincent, I don't want partners who trade help for control," he said. A younger board member frowned. "You're implying corruption?" "I'm implying influence," Daniel replied. David shifted slightly in the corner. The silver-haired woman studied Daniel's face for a long moment. "You understand that public trust requires stability," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yes." "And what happens if you lose?" she asked. The question wasn't about the program. It was about his life. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He thought of Friday, of the note from his daughter's teacher, of the shoebox in the closet. "If I lose," he said quietly, "I'll keep working." One board member raised an eyebrow. "Working where?" he asked. Daniel held his gaze. "Anywhere that will take me." Silence again. The silver-haired woman finally leaned back. "We will deliberate," she said. Daniel stood slowly. He didn't plead. He didn't argue. He walked out of the room with his shoulders straight. David followed him into the hallway. "You handled that well," David said. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Does that matter?" David hesitated. "It might," he said. Daniel nodded once and left. When he stepped outside, the air felt thinner. He checked his phone. No new messages. He drove to pick up his daughter early. The drawing finalists were already displayed in the school auditorium. He slipped into the back row quietly. 5 drawings hung on the wall. His daughter's was in the center. A man and a little girl under a giant yellow star. But she'd added something new. In the corner, she'd drawn a small house. Above it, in careful letters, W.E. Stay. Daniel felt something break inside him. Not loud. Just crack. His daughter spotted him and waved excitedly from across the room. He waved back, throat tight. Later, as they walked home together, she slipped her hand into his. "Did you win?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. She nodded. "That's okay," she replied. "You're still you." He looked down at her. "You don't care about the big money?" he asked. She shrugged. "I just don't want you sad." He stopped walking. Cars passed by unaware. He crouched down in front of her. "I was sad before," he admitted quietly. She touched his cheek with her small hand. "Then don't go back there," she said. He nodded once. "I won't." That evening, as the sun went down, his phone finally buzzed. An email from the program. He stared at it for a long moment before opening it. "Board decision. You advance to final round." He exhaled slowly. Not relief, not celebration, just a long breath. He hadn't realized he was holding, below it, one more line. Final allocation decision announced Friday. Friday. He looked at his daughter across the room, still holding her paper star. He was still 1 week from eviction, still under public scrutiny, still being watched. But he had one more step, one more chance, and for the first time, the pressure didn't feel like it was crushing him. It felt like something he could carry. He folded the email closed and walked over to his daughter. She looked up at him. "Well?" she asked. He crouched down, eye level again. "I'm still in," he said. She grinned. "I knew it." He pulled her into his arms. He didn't lift her up. He just held her there. And this time, when his chest tightened, it wasn't from fear. It was from understanding something he hadn't before. Winning wouldn't fix everything, but losing wouldn't destroy him either, because the part of him that almost disappeared in that bathroom wasn't disappearing again. Not now. Friday came too fast. Daniel woke up before his alarm. The apartment was still dark. The air felt cold against his skin, even under the blanket. He lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. He could hear his daughter breathing in the next room. He didn't move right away. He kept thinking about the words she'd written on her drawing. W. Feast Day. It felt like a promise and a warning at the same time. When he finally got up, he walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. Nothing had changed. Same half carton of eggs. Same scraped butter. Same emptiness. $10 million was supposedly hanging in the balance, and he still didn't have milk. He shut the fridge and leaned against it, eyes closed. Then he heard her bedroom door creak open. She padded into the kitchen with her rabbit tucked under her arm. "It's today," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yeah." She climbed into a chair and looked at him with a seriousness that didn't belong on a child's face. "If you win," she said, "can we get a dog?" He almost smiled. "A dog?" "Yes, a big one." He shook his head slowly. "We'll see." She accepted that answer like she always did. Then she said, "If you don't win, can we still get a dog?" Daniel stared at her. He didn't respond fast enough. She leaned forward. "Because I think a dog would help you." That landed harder than it should have. He cleared his throat. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe it would." She nodded, satisfied. He dropped her at school early because the final announcement was scheduled at noon. The auditorium event for the drawing contest was also today. Same day, same building. That felt deliberate, even if it wasn't. He walked her to the door and crouched down. "Listen," he said. "No matter what happens today, you did good." She frowned. "I didn't do anything bad." He nodded. "I know." She hugged him tight, then pulled back. "Don't disappear," she whispered. His chest tightened. He forced his voice steady. "I'm right here," he said. She went inside. Daniel stood outside the school for a moment, watching the doors close. Then he drove downtown. The final event wasn't at City Hall this time. It was at the community theater. Bigger stage, bigger crowd, more cameras, the kind of place where applause sounded like waves. When he arrived, security was heavier. Metal detectors, staff with headsets, people lined up outside holding signs. Some of the signs had his name on them. Daniel Ruiz for the people. He stopped walking for a second. He didn't feel proud. He felt uneasy. He didn't want to be for the people. He wanted to be for his daughter, for his home, for the quiet parts of life that didn't require banners. Inside, the lobby buzzed with voices. Reporters clustered like insects. Volunteers handed out pamphlets. Daniel spotted Celeste near the entrance. She looked flawless. Hair perfect. Suit crisp. Smile ready. Jared stood a few feet away, talking loudly to a local politician. They both looked like they belonged here. Daniel felt like he'd walked in wearing the wrong life. David Kim approached him. "You made it," David said. Daniel nodded. David looked tired today. Dark circles under his eyes. "You okay?" Daniel asked. David hesitated. Then he nodded once. "I've seen what happens after people win," he said quietly. "It changes them. Sometimes it ruins them." Daniel didn't answer. David lowered his voice further. "Whatever happens," he said, "don't let them own you." Daniel looked at him. Before he could respond, someone called his name. "Mr. Ruiz." A reporter stepped in front of him, microphone already raised. "Daniel Ruiz," she said brightly, "today could change your life forever. What are you hoping for?" Daniel stared at the microphone. He wanted to say something clean, something that would sound good on TV. But his mouth felt heavy. "I'm hoping," he said slowly, "that my daughter doesn't have to grow up watching me lose." The reporter blinked. Daniel walked past her. Backstage, they lined the finalists up in a narrow hallway. Bright lights. Makeup artists offering powder. Staff giving last-minute instructions. Daniel declined the makeup. He didn't want to look polished. He wanted to look like himself, because if he won, he wanted the world to know exactly who they'd given it to. And if he lost, he didn't want his face to look like a performance. A staff member handed him a card. "Read this when you're on stage," she said. "It's a prepared statement." Daniel looked down at it. It was full of phrases like community empowerment and sustainable growth. He folded it once and slipped it into his pocket without reading it again. He heard Celeste laughing softly nearby, speaking with someone in a calm, confident voice. He heard Jared making a joke about when he won, not if. Daniel stayed quiet. He focused on breathing. Then the stage manager opened the door. "Finalists," she said, "you're on in 2 minutes." Daniel's heart started pounding. His hands were cold. He reached into his pocket and touched the paper stars. 2 of them, his daughter's small folded edges pressed against his fingertips. He held them there until the stage manager waved again. "Now." They walked out. The theater lights hit him like heat. Rows of people filled the room. Hundreds, maybe more. Faces blurred together. Phones held up. Camera flashes popping. The host stood center stage, smiling like this was a celebration. "Welcome," she said into the microphone. "Today we conclude the Regional Community Initiative. 3 finalists, 1 winner. $10 million. Applause erupted. Daniel stood in his spot, hands at his sides, trying to keep his breathing even. The host introduced each finalist. Celeste. Jared. Daniel. Each name got a different kind of applause. Daniel's was louder than he expected. He didn't know how to feel about that. The host smiled and turned toward the audience. "Before we announce the winner," she said, "we'd like to show a short montage of each finalist's journey." The screens behind them lit up. Celeste's montage played first. Her visiting schools, shaking hands, hugging children, speaking into microphones. Then Jared's, business meetings, community centers, handing out checks. Then Daniel's, footage of him at the school office, signing the lunch debt payment, standing in the warehouse simulation, guiding the child volunteer by the hand, sitting quietly at the nonprofit, listening. Then a clip of him at his apartment door telling the reporter to leave. The audience murmured. Daniel's stomach tightened. He hadn't known they'd filmed that. He hadn't consented to it, but it was too late now. The montage ended with a shot of him walking his daughter to school, holding her hand. The screen faded. The host stepped forward again. The final decision, she said, was based on board evaluation, public voting, and demonstrated capacity under pressure. Daniel felt his heartbeat in his throat. The host held an envelope, the kind of envelope that always looked dramatic on stage, even though it was just paper. She opened it slowly. The room held its breath. Daniel stared straight ahead. He didn't blink. He didn't move. Then the host smiled wider. And the winner of the $10 million community allocation is... She paused. Daniel felt the air tighten. Daniel Ruiz. For a second, Daniel didn't understand what she'd said. The applause hit him like a wall of sound. People stood up, cheering, clapping. Cameras swung toward him. The host gestured for him to step forward. Daniel's legs moved, but his mind lagged behind. He walked to the center of the stage. The spotlight made his eyes sting. The host handed him the microphone. He looked out at the crowd. Faces, phones, smiling mouths. He could see Celeste clapping politely, smile stiff. He could see Jared's jaw clenched. Daniel's hands trembled as he held the microphone. He didn't read the prepared statement. He didn't thank the board first. He didn't do what they expected. He swallowed hard. I don't know what to say, he admitted. The crowd quieted slightly. Daniel's voice was low. I almost wasn't here, he said. A hush spread across the room. He didn't explain further. He couldn't. Not on a stage. He tightened his grip on the microphone. But I am, he continued. Because my daughter, she kept pulling me back. His throat tightened. He paused, breathing through it. This money, he said, is not a miracle. It's a tool, and if I use it wrong, it will ruin me. So I'm going to use it like it's not mine. The room was silent. He nodded once, more to himself than anyone else. That's all I can promise, he said. Applause rose again. But Daniel barely heard it. His hands were shaking harder now. Because winning wasn't relief. Winning was responsibility becoming permanent. As he stepped off the stage, staff surrounded him immediately, guiding him toward backstage interviews. Reporters pressed in. Daniel, how does it feel? What will you do first? Will you move out of your apartment? Daniel kept walking, trying not to look at anyone. Then he saw Vincent Hale standing near the side exit, watching him with that same calm smile. Daniel's stomach dropped. Vincent raised 2 fingers in a small wave, like they were old friends. Daniel didn't wave back. He walked past. But Vincent leaned in close enough that only Daniel could hear him. You think you won, Vincent murmured. Now you belong to them. Daniel kept moving, his jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Outside, the sun was bright. Too bright. His phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Grady. I saw the news. Congratulations. I'll be by today to discuss your rent. Daniel stared at the message. Even now, it wasn't over. He put the phone away and got into his car. He sat there for a long time before turning the key. Then he drove to the school, because his daughter's drawing contest was still happening, because she didn't know yet, and he needed to see her face before the world swallowed him whole. The school parking lot was packed. Cars lined the curb. Parents in work uniforms, office clothes, even a few in scrubs. People moved toward the auditorium in slow clusters, holding coffee cups, adjusting jackets, talking about things that didn't matter. Daniel parked at the far end and sat in the car for a moment. His hands were still trembling. $10 million. The words kept circling in his head, but they didn't settle. They didn't land like something solid. They floated, unreal, like a sound he'd heard from another room. He touched his shirt pocket. The paper stars were still there. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the building. A few people recognized him immediately. Their faces changed. Smiles widened. Some whispered. One man raised his phone like he was about to take a picture. Daniel kept walking. He didn't stop. He didn't greet anyone. The hallway smelled like floor cleaner and old paint. It felt familiar. Safer than the theater had. There were no spotlights here. No scripted applause. Just a school. His daughter's teacher, Miss Turner, spotted him near the auditorium doors. She looked startled, then pleased. "Mr. Ruiz," she said softly. "You made it." Daniel nodded. "I wouldn't miss it." Miss Turner hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the murmuring parents around them. "I saw the announcement," she said carefully. Daniel didn't answer right away. "Congratulations," she added. He nodded again, but his face stayed flat. Miss Turner studied him, then said quietly, "She's been talking about you all week." Daniel's throat tightened. "What has she been saying?" Miss Turner smiled faintly. "That you're doing something important. That you're going to be okay." Daniel looked away for a second. He couldn't hold her gaze. Inside the auditorium, the drawings were displayed along the front wall. 5 sheets of paper, taped carefully, each with a child's handwriting above it. Parents were already gathered, pointing, laughing softly, calling their kids over. Daniel stood at the back. He saw his daughter near the stage, sitting cross-legged with the other finalists. She was swinging her legs, humming under her breath, completely unaware of what had happened downtown. She looked up. Her eyes locked onto him instantly. Her whole face changed, brightened, like the room belonged to her again. She jumped up and ran down the aisle. "Daddy!" she shouted. Her voice echoed. Some parents turned. Daniel crouched just in time and caught her as she ran into him. She wrapped her arms around his neck. "You came," she whispered into his shoulder, like she hadn't been sure. "I told you I would," he said. She pulled back and looked at him, serious again. "You look weird." He swallowed. "Weird how?" "Like you got in trouble." He almost laughed. It came out as a quiet breath. "Not trouble," he said. She squinted at him. Then she pointed at his pocket. "Do you still have the stars?" He nodded. "Good," she said, like that settled something inside her. The principal stepped up to the microphone and began speaking. She thanked parents for coming. She praised creativity. She talked about dreams. Daniel barely heard it. He watched his daughter. She kept glancing back at him, like she needed to make sure he was still there. Then the principal announced the winner. It wasn't his daughter. A boy named Lucas won. His drawing was of a giant spaceship with his family inside it. The parents clapped. The boy beamed. His mother cried a little. Daniel clapped too. His daughter clapped too. She didn't look upset. She just looked thoughtful. When the applause died down, the kids were called forward to receive small certificates. His daughter walked up proudly, took hers, and held it like it was important. When she returned, she sat beside Daniel and looked down at the paper. "I didn't win," she said quietly. Daniel leaned closer. "No," he agreed. She looked up at him. "Did you win?" The question was soft, almost careful. Daniel stared at her for a moment. The auditorium felt too loud, too full of air. He could have lied. He could have waited until they got home, but he didn't. He nodded once. Her eyes widened slightly. "You did?" she whispered. Daniel nodded again. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then she grabbed his arm with both hands. "How much?" Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to say it here. Not in a room full of strangers. Not in a school where every parent was one overheard sentence away from turning into a crowd. But her eyes were locked on him. He leaned in close to her ear. 10 million, he whispered. Her face froze. Then she pulled back and stared at him like he'd just told her the moon was theirs. "That's," she started. She stopped, struggling to find the word. Then she said, very quietly, "That's too much again." Daniel's throat tightened. "Yeah," he murmured. "It is." She stared at him for another second, then leaned forward and hugged him hard. So hard her arms shook. He held her. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just held her, feeling her small body pressed against his chest, feeling how solid she was. People around them were talking, laughing, filing out. Daniel didn't care. After a moment, she pulled back and looked up at him. "Are we okay now?" she asked. The question hit him in the ribs. Not because it was innocent, because it wasn't. It was the question she'd been carrying quietly, maybe for months. Daniel swallowed. He didn't want to say yes too fast. He didn't want to give her a promise the world could still break, so he answered honestly. "We're safer," he said. She nodded, like that was enough. Then she frowned, but she still looked sad. Daniel stared at her. He could feel the weight of the last year sitting in his shoulders, in his spine, in his hands. He could feel the memory of the bathroom, the cold tub, the silence. He didn't want to put that inside her. But he also didn't want to pretend it never happened. "I'm not sad," he said slowly. "I'm tired." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Then rest." It sounded like an order, like something she expected him to obey. He almost smiled. They walked home instead of driving. Daniel didn't know why. He just needed air, space, something real under his feet. The afternoon sun was warm. The sidewalk cracks looked less like damage and more like texture. His daughter skipped beside him, certificate tucked under her arm. Halfway home, she stopped suddenly and pointed toward the corner store. "Calvin is there," she whispered. Daniel followed her gaze. The old man sat near the wall, knees pulled to his chest, hands wrapped around a cup. His coat was too thin for the season. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest again. His daughter looked up at him. "Can we help him now?" she asked. Daniel stared at Calvin. He thought about the 10 million. He thought about the cameras. He thought about the board and their words. Stability, public trust, capacity. He thought about Vincent Hale telling him he belonged to them now. Daniel's jaw tightened. He walked across the street. His daughter followed close behind. Calvin looked up when Daniel approached. His eyes narrowed slightly, suspicious, ready to be dismissed. Daniel crouched down so they were closer to eye level. "Hey," Daniel said quietly. Calvin stared at him. "You're the guy from the news," Calvin muttered. Daniel nodded once. Calvin scoffed. "Figures." Daniel didn't react. Instead he asked, "Do you want something to eat?" Calvin's eyes flicked to Daniel's daughter. He hesitated. Then he shrugged. "If you're offering." Daniel stood. "Come with us," he said. Calvin blinked. "What?" Daniel's voice stayed steady. "Come with us," he repeated. "Not to the store. Home. We have food." Calvin stared like Daniel had lost his mind. His daughter tugged Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "is that safe?" Daniel looked down at her. He didn't lie. "I don't know," he said. Then he looked back at Calvin. "But I know what it feels like to be alone," Daniel said. "And I'm tired of pretending I don't." Calvin didn't speak for a long moment. Then he slowly pushed himself to his feet, joints cracking, movements stiff. "All right," he said. "One meal." Daniel nodded. They walked back toward the apartment building together. Neighbors stared from balconies. Someone opened a window and leaned out. Daniel felt it. The watching. He didn't care. Inside the apartment, Daniel cleared the table. He cooked what he could. Eggs, toast, a can of soup. The food wasn't impressive, but it was warm. Calvin ate slowly, like he didn't trust the meal to stay. Daniel's daughter sat across from him, watching carefully. After a while, she asked, "Where do you sleep?" Calvin looked at her. "Wherever I can," he said. She nodded like she'd expected that. Then she said, "You can sleep on our couch." Daniel froze. Calvin stared at her. Daniel's daughter looked at her father. "We have a couch," she said simply. Daniel felt the pressure rise in his chest again. Not fear. Something else. Something like grief. He looked at Calvin. Calvin's eyes were wet, but he didn't wipe them. "I don't want to be a burden," Calvin said quietly. Daniel's voice was low. "You're already a burden," he said. Calvin flinched slightly. Daniel continued, steady. "On the street." On the system, on everyone who walks past you pretending you're invisible. You're already carrying weight. He swallowed. So let it be here, Daniel said, for one night. Silence. Then Calvin nodded once. One night, he agreed. That evening, after Calvin fell asleep on the couch, Daniel stood in the hallway outside his daughter's room. She was already in bed, rabbit under her chin. He stepped inside quietly and sat on the edge of her mattress. She opened her eyes immediately. "You're still awake," she whispered. Daniel nodded. She shifted closer. "Daddy?" "Yeah. Are you going to leave now that you have the money?" Daniel stared at her. He understood then that she wasn't worried about the apartment. She was worried about him, about whether the money would pull him away, whether relief would make him disappear. Daniel's throat tightened. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I'm not leaving." She watched him. "Promise?" Daniel hesitated. He didn't like promises anymore. Promises had a way of becoming ghosts. But this one mattered. He nodded once. "I promise," he said. She closed her eyes again. Her breathing slowed. Daniel sat there a little longer. Then he walked back into the kitchen. He stood in the dim light, staring at the sink, the place where he'd once leaned, shaking, thinking about silence and water, and the easiest way out. Now the sink was just a sink. The tub was just a tub. The apartment was still small, still worn, still imperfect. But it was full. Full of his daughter's drawings taped crookedly to the fridge. Full of the sound of someone breathing on the couch. Full of life that didn't care if he was ashamed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the 2 paper stars. He set them on the table gently. Then he sat down and let his hands rest. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was about to fall. He didn't feel happy. Not the way people think happiness is supposed to feel. He felt quiet. He felt present. He felt like he'd survived something invisible, something nobody would ever clap for. And he understood what had really changed. It wasn't the money. It was that he wasn't trying to disappear anymore, because someone small had been watching him the whole time, and she had kept him here, without speeches, without magic, just paper stars, a steady hand, and a simple sentence she kept repeating like it was the only thing that mattered. "We stay."